It's a big weather event and it's on its way this summer. Some scientists are predicting a strong El Nino that could wreak weather havoc across the globe and cause some changes for us here in Wisconsin. Here to explain is Dr. Dan Vimont. He is professor at UW-Madison in the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences. He and his team have developed an El Nino forecasting model so reliable it is used by NASA and other leading scientific organizations around the world. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's good to be here. Thanks.
Help us understand, what is an El Nino effect?
It's a good question. Up here in Wisconsin, sometimes it's hard to fathom what's going on in the tropical Pacific. So, an El Nino event is essentially the biggest thing that can happen to our climate system naturally on year-to-year time scales. So, every 3 to 7 years, the tropical Pacific warms up by a few degrees Celsius, and that may not seem like, and that's an El Nino event, and that may not seem like a lot, but we got to keep in mind that the tropical Pacific the Pacific Ocean is the largest ocean basin on Earth. The tropics take an enormous amount of space, and water takes a lot of energy to warm up. So, an El Nino event is a complete redistribution of the heat content of the entire tropical Pacific Ocean. It's an enormous climatic event.
And when we have an El Nino and we have that warming, what kind of impact does it have across the globe? And potentially, what kind of impact does it have here in Wisconsin?
That's a good question. Uh, as the tropical Pacific reorganizes, we can think of the effect that El Nino has globally, like throwing a rock in a pond. When you throw a rock in a pond, waves kind of emanate outward. And you may not be exactly where that rock is, but you might see those waves later on. El Nino is an enormous rock in our global climate system. And the same thing occurs as an El Nino event occurs. It sends out signals that we realize as variations in our jet streams. And so during an El Nino event, the jet stream tends to be elongated across the Pacific, and we tend to get more rainfall in California and the West Coast. It tends to be wetter across the southeastern U.S. and generally warmer in the northwestern U.S. Around here in Wisconsin, we can be a little warmer during El Nino events, but all of that's happening with a couple of other things going on as well. One is climate change, and then the other is just our natural year-to-year variations in weather that occur randomly. So it tends to bias, like here in Wisconsin, I like to think of it as rolling weighted dice. When you have an El Nino event, those dice are a little more weighted towards a warmer winter, but you still could come up snake eyes. So
When we take a look at most of the impact happening farther away from us in Wisconsin, why should we be concerned or interested in the fact that there's an El Nino?
it's a good question. There's a number of, again, it is an enormous climatic event. And so it has immense impacts, not just in the US, but across the globe as well. For example, in Indonesia, it has an enormous impact on food security. And there are millions of people who depend on the timing of the rice harvest, for example. When El Nino delays that rice harvest, it delays it creates food insecurity for people around the world. That's an enormous part of our global food trade. In Kenya, it affects corn production. It creates warmer and drier conditions across Brazil, which may impact dengue outbreaks or even Zika outbreaks. So there's enormous impacts globally. And we will feel those here in Wisconsin because we're a global society. We're connected, and we care about people around the world, and we're affected by those events.
Some folks who are listening to this or watching this might think, okay, the weather gets a bit warmer here in the summer. That's not so bad. But there are consequences if we have summer weather that is warmer than we normally expect.
Certainly. And during an El Nino, the El Nino events tend to peak towards the end of the calendar year. So the effects of El Nino are most strongly felt here in North America during the winter season. But the summer season is also affected by a variety of things, one of which is climate change. And I'll get to that in a second here. El Nino and climate change have this interesting relationship. Um, in the summer, we care a lot. A little bit warmer means higher probability of extreme heat, higher probability of extremely warm nights, and that has a big impact on human health. It has impacts on our agriculture. In the wintertime, a warmer winter seems like it would be great, but not if you're a forester and you're concerned about overwintering pests. Farmers are impacted by the changes in snowfall, our flooding potential changes as we get as snow melts, and if we have a different characteristic of that snow season, there's a lot of impacts from that. Also, we tend to have a pretty great winter tourism industry here in Wisconsin. I enjoy getting out and yeah, getting cross country skiing or skiing with my family. But that's been hard these last few years, especially in southern Wisconsin, as we've seen these warmer winters kind of fundamentally changing the characteristics of wintertime.
And you were saying that El Nino and climate change have a really interesting relationship that
Yeah,
impacts our weather as well.
that's right. There's two sides to that. On the one hand, El Nino, as I said, is like a giant rock in a pond. It kind of we see the effects kind of rippling outward around our planet. But climate change is enormous too, and recent research has shown that the effect of climate change may be offsetting some of that rippling effect, which means that the predictability from El Nino may be decreasing a little bit. On the other side of that, an El Nino event is a massive amount of heat. It's enough heat redistribution and then released to our atmosphere to warm our global temperatures for this coming event, which is likely to be a big one. It's enough to warm our atmosphere by a couple tenths of a degree, our planet by a couple tenths of a degree. So 2027 will be the warmest year on record, probably by a long shot. We may pass the 1.5 degrees Celsius mark in 2027, just because of the amount of heat and the amount of warmth that we expect from the coming El Nino event. So sort of those two things. One, El Nino contributes to these global climate, this global warming, and these global climatic events. And then climate change is kind of affecting the way that El Nino behaves as well.
And that 1.5 degrees Celsius increase, that is a big deal.
Yep. I think we've known for a while that we were going to pass that, and the question was when. And I think people talk about that 1.5 degree is something that the was talked about during the Paris Accord. I think 2 degrees is generally seen as a threshold of that we would like to avoid. I don't think we're going to avoid that either, but yeah, 1.5's a big deal.
So as we see the water's warming now with this El Nino, we see overall climate temperatures around the globe going up. Can we expect to see more El Ninos in the future? And what impact would that have on our climate here in Wisconsin? Not just from summer, over one summer or winter, but long term.
That's a good question, and I think you're hitting on one of the research questions is at the forefront of our field right now. What does El Nino look like in the coming 100 years or so? We don't know. The tropical Pacific and El Nino have this interesting relationship where they're very sensitive to each other. And so if we change the mean state, so if we warm the mean state, if we change just the way that heat is distributed in the tropical Pacific, it can change the characteristics of El Nino in ways that we can't fully simulate at this point. So that's a really good question. It may have a big effect. We're working on it.
Well, thank you so much for helping us understand what El Nino is and also helping us understand why we need to pay attention to it here in Wisconsin, not just for the rest of this year, but also for the years and perhaps decades to come. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
We're back in just a minute.